Hello, everyone. Welcome to my world. We're going to go deep into the mind today. The mind electric. And what a ride it will be. My name's MISCHKE. Priya Anand is a neurologist at Boston University. She is an assistant professor of neurology at Boston University School of Medicine. But more than that, she's a good soul and a fine conversationalist. I buried myself in her book over the last week, The Mind Electric, a neurologist on the strangeness and wonder of our brains, and I was delighted that she was willing to give me some time to have a chat. I hope you enjoy it. Priya Anand, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Tommy.
One lovely part of The Mind Electric is a reader gets a little bit of a backroom peek at the life of an MD. In your case, a neurologist, but much of what you deal with, any MD could relate to in terms of what you write about in this book, correct?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you say that. I think the longer that you practice as a physician or the longer you spend time in a hospital, you forget that it's a very strange place that kind of doesn't adhere to sort of the normal rules of society outside of the walls of a hospital. I think it can be really easy when you spend too much time in a hospital to forget that, but it is a really sort of peculiar place. And so a part of writing the book was the pleasure of sharing that experience with people who haven't spent as much time within the walls of a hospital.
And the book is called The Mind Electric because as a neurologist, you're often dealing with afflictions of the brain.
That's sort of the bread and butter of my work. The hospital where I practice, which is the Boston City Hospital, one of the sort of the first municipal hospitals in the country in the mid 1800s. The first neurologist at the Boston City Hospital was actually not given the title neurologist. He was given the title electrician because so much of how they treated diseases of the brain at that time were electrical currents and impulses. And some things have changed since those days, some things not so much.
Electrician.
Oh. Electrician. He was the hospital electrician.
Wow. Do you view the mind as a series of currents? I mean, is there something in the word electric that works for you here?
Yes. So the title owes a little bit to the Whitman poem, The Body Electric. And it's true in a literal sense. You know, a lot of how neurons, little cells that make up our brain, communicate with one another is all about translating between chemical signals and electrical ones. So information really moves through our brain as electricity. I'm so fascinated by this because I think there is this sort of massive gap between the electrical currents moving through networks of cells in a brain and experiences and consciousness. We sort of imagine that we understand the brain because we can track the flow of electricity coursing through it. But there's this wide sort of gap between that and the way that we experience the world that I'm fascinated by.
One of the things I was struck by in your book, and clearly you're making this point often, is that when things go wrong in the brain, a person's experience of reality, of life, of existence is altered, sometimes dramatically, sometimes shockingly. And it leaves one with this sense of wondering, what is real? If it's just a series of synapses working in a certain way, producing one kind of reality, and that all can change abruptly with a few little electric quirks going in one direction or another, then what is real?
I think that's such a great observation. So one of the inspirations for the book is a particular symptom that I have seen many times in people who have brain injuries. It's called confabulation. And what confabulation is essentially when someone is missing information. So let's say someone has a brain injury that causes them to have amnesia. Their brain, without them realizing, will construct a story to fill in the details of the world that they're missing. For instance, I can think of patients I've cared for who have this symptom, who have lost their memory, and I will ask them, have we met before? And they'll tell me a really elaborate story about how we were childhood friends, or we last saw each other at our high school reunion, really detailed, elaborate stories that any novelist would envy. And for the longest time, I thought that was so interesting that when their brains are injured, they can have this kind of storytelling pathology. But I think what I've realized is that I think anything that you can observe about a wounded brain is something that reveals something about how our brains work when they're whole and well. I think what I've realized is that our brain is really constructing our reality by choosing what we focus on, what we take in, even when we're healthy. So I think our brain plays a major role in constructing our reality, whether or not we have an injury. And I think when we experience wounds and injuries, that changes the nature of the reality, but it really just drives home that our brains are really shaping the world, not just kind of passively observing it.
If you were to list the most common things you're dealing with patients, all of it centered around the mind and the brain, what are you encountering most?
So probably the most common kinds of neurologic conditions worldwide are things like strokes. So some part of the brain is sort of starved of oxygen. Migraine headaches. I don't know if you've ever experienced a migraine headache. Many people have, and they can have all kinds of bizarre neurologic symptoms, all kinds of strange visual illusions. I also see a lot of patients with epilepsy and seizures. And then I have some special training in neurologic diseases that are either the consequence of an infection or the consequence of an overactive immune system. So that's conditions like meningitis, encephalitis. These are sort of types of brain inflammation. So I see kind of the whole gamut of things that can go wrong with the brain.
You mentioned migraines. Thank God I have never dealt with one because I hear about what it's like. 1 in 3 women experience migraines?
That's exactly right. I think if you look at sort of the entire global burden of brain diseases, I think migraine probably tops the list. And what is so interesting about migraine, Joan Didion writes about her experience of migraine headaches. And she says, the thing about migraine headaches is that everyone who doesn't have them knows that they're imaginary. What's so interesting about them is that they're this really deeply personal, subjective experience, and they change the way that you experience the world. Sometimes the migraines often come with auras, and those are typically bright falling lights crossing their vision. And I think what is so compelling about migraines is that they're a strange experience. They're deeply personal. No one who's outside of your head can know quite what you're experiencing. And we still don't have a great explanation for what causes migraine headaches. We use that term to capture a lot of different kinds of neurologic symptoms that don't fit neatly into other categories, but they're a common experience that we still have yet to kind of understand better.
Well, 2 things. One is, aren't migraine headaches intensely painful?
Most people who experience migraine headaches will describe kind of a pounding pain, and then they also make you feel nauseous. They make you feel like you can't tolerate lights or sounds. They make you feel like you just need to curl up in a dark room until the feeling passes. They're really, really very uncomfortable.
And number 2, what do you mean when she says people who don't have them assume they're imaginary?
This is a real challenge about the human body and mind, which is that a migraine headache is a type of symptom that there's nothing that someone outside of your body can see. There's nothing that's going to show up on an EKG. There's no gaping wound in your abdomen that someone outside of your body can see. All that we have to understand someone else's experience of pain or migraines is their description. So even though it's a really profound experience, and even though it totally shapes your life and defines what your day is going to look like, the experience of a migraine is so personal and so subjective, and there's no outward sign or manifestation. All that someone else can do is believe that you're having them. I love that description from Joan Didion because she captures the sense of frustration of having an experience that is so kind of internal that all you can do is ask someone else to believe you're having it. Like the most informative image, like the way that we think about MRIs as an image that tells us something about the brain, the most informative image that tells us something about migraines, I think, is there's a hospital in London that's devoted to the care of migraines. And every year for years, they would have a migraine art competition where people would draw the experience of their migraine auras.
They asked migraine sufferers to submit drawings that captured their experience of their migraine auras. The entrants drew their phantasmagorical visual experiences of their migraines, fractured mosaics of colors, a person whose head was replaced with the head of a serpent, and strange, Dali-esque visual illusions of elongated fingers, conjoined limbs, or a head ballooning while the remainder of the body dwindles. As a resident, you rotated on a pediatric neurology service where one supervising doctor asked young patients to draw their migraines rather than struggle to describe them. The children drew the headaches as high-heeled shoes hitting their temples, or jackhammers boring into their foreheads, as frying pans cracking their skulls, or freight trains speeding into their brains. One drew a frowning drummer pounding skins. They drew their auras as drifting colors, double rainbows.
I love that example of sort of the images, because if you were to look at the diagnostic criteria for migraine headaches, it would tell you that migraine headaches are throbbing or pounding. Those are the two words in the diagnostic criteria. But I think there's so much more that you can understand if you see that image of a drummer pounding with their drumsticks. There's so much more that you can understand about what the experience of that headache is than just that sort of dry clinical description. I'll give you another example. I don't know if you've ever experienced sleep paralysis.
Oh my God, I haven't.
Yeah.
And I've interviewed people about that. And I'm telling you, those are worse stories to me than the migraine stories.
It is also so common. It's like 1 in 10 people will experience it. So much so that I think it's almost, for many people, it's a part of kind of normal sleep architecture. But essentially what happens is, just as you're about to fall asleep or wake up, you feel like you're trapped in your body. You can't move. You actually see some of the imagery of dreams. You'll see dark shadows or creatures. You might hear some sort of imagined sounds of dreams, but you're wide awake. Your brain is wide awake. And that is such a terrifying experience. And I could tell you something about what is happening in your spinal cord or your brainstem and the chemistry of sleep paralysis. But if you experienced it, and I bet some of your guests who have had it or some of your listeners who have had it would tell me, like, that totally misses the point. Like, that doesn't say anything about what it means to actually experience it. But because it's so common, if you look across cultural traditions, every single culture has a folklore or a mythology. There is a witch that casts a spell, or a jealous sorcerer, or an unsettled spirit who kind of sits on your chest and inhabits your body. Every cultural tradition has a story or a mythology to explain it. And I think there's as much truth in those stories as there is in the scientific explanations that I could give you. Those stories tell you something about what it's like to experience it, why it feels so profound and supernatural and strange. And I think people who have experienced it sometimes resonate more with the stories than they do with the cold, hard clinical facts. So I think there's a truth in all of these different ways of understanding illness and bodies.
Well, the one truth that I believe in is that these people are having this experience. What really is going on, I don't know, but they are having this experience. And it has been described to me in ways that are beyond the most terrifying nightmare I've ever had, because these people feel very much awake, in many cases in the room, in their bed, dealing with reality. There they are. There's their dresser. There's their nightstand. They can't move. And who's that coming at them from the doorway there? Oh, it's Hat Man. Do you know about Hat Man?
I can imagine, but no, I have not heard Hat Man.
Okay, so this is a real phenomenon globally, with a certain percentage who have sleep paralysis.
Wow.
This same guy arrives, and he is there to torment. The common denominator, he's a mysterious figure, dark figure with a hat. You can't distinguish much more than that, but he comes up to you. He comes up to your bed. He whispers things in your ear. He lets you know what he's going to do to you. And I have spent 2-3 hours with a woman describing her lifetime of Hat Man visits. And it is so horrible that I think I wouldn't be able to go to sleep at night. I would do anything, find any pill to not sleep.
The first time that I saw him, I remember checking my clock and setting my alarm for school the next day, so I knew exactly what time it was. And within seconds, I can't speak, I can't yell, I can't scream, I can't move. Prior to this, my spirituality or my religious beliefs, I never really believed in hell. That doesn't make sense to me. So the idea of like demons or evil spirit or anything like that was really not something that I thought about. But when this thing entered my room, it was malevolent, evil, condensed. Unbelievably. I've met people I think were evil, and I've never ever felt any evil or malevolence like this in my whole life. It's just dark. It came around the bed, and it got right up into my face. It said to me, I'm going to torture you for a very long time, and then I'm going to kill you. And when it said this to me, I could feel the breath on my face. I could feel it. That's when I freaked out, and I came out of it, and I sat up, and the reason it was so weird is because I told you I set the alarm. And when I came out of the experience, like a minute had gone by. I don't think I could be dreaming because it happened so quickly. I just put my head on the pillow, and he started to form at the end of my bed. And it was like a black, smoky substance. But he was moving like a human, basically. And he had I could see the wide-brimmed hat. I could see the blackness, the black face, the outline all the way down to where I could tell he had like a long jacket, but then the legs weren't really there. I don't know. I couldn't see him. Maybe the bed was there. And this time he grabbed my ankles, and I feel it. Feels exactly like if I were touching you right now. And he grabbed my ankles, and he started to pull me down to the end of the bed, and he basically said he was going to rape me. And when he grabs me and he pulls me, my perspective, so my eyes are open, and I'm looking at the ceiling, and the ceiling is, I'm moving. The ceiling, as he's pulling me, the perspective is changing, as if he's pulling my actual body. And he's never been able to actually sexually assault me or anything like that, because I get out of it. And when I come back, all of a sudden I'm back where I was, back on the pillow. My perspective is back where it was before it started. I actually went to a female friend of mine, and I begged her to stay in my room with me. I told her I'd pay her to keep me awake all night long because I was terrified to go to sleep. Your eyes are open, you can hear and you can see, but you can't move or speak. He likes to get right in your face. And there's no face, it's just black. I wish I could describe how scary. I've had a lot of scary experiences in my life. We all have. We've all had moments. A car accident or, I cannot come close other than if I had been maybe in contact with a serial killer and thought my life was going to be over.
If you have been injured by the Hat Man, the law firm of Bradshaw and Bryant will not be able to get you the financial compensation package to make you feel like justice has been served. The Hat Man, unfortunately, is immune from any court proceedings or legal decisions, and insurance companies will not negotiate with such a creature nor settle with one. That's a bummer. It's ultimately why sleep paralysis can be doubly dreadful. In day-to-day life, however, people who are reckless, careless, and callous can be taken on. And these caped crusaders at Bradshaw and Bryant come through time and time again for their clients in ways that show there is good in this world, and it can defeat bad when the right lawyers get involved. Bradshaw and Bryant. They're useless against Hat Man. For anything else, go to MinnesotaPersonalInjury.com. American Pressure. Now there's a business that seems like it should have a superhero logo. Captain America did his thing. American Pressure is just as powerful, offering industrial pressure washers that remove the grit, the grime, the filth, and frankly the evil from this world, with the most high-tech sophisticated pressure washing equipment in the industry today. If you're on the job using pressure washers, American Pressure is your knight in shining armor. They come out in their vehicles for repair work. They stock every single part. They replace entire pressure washing systems when needed. People with good hearts, good heads who've been at this as long as pressure washers have existed in this world. They're your pressure washing champions. You call them and they actually answer their phones just like normal folk. Your people, your pressure washing kings. Learn more at AmericanPressure.com.
Most versions of sleep paralysis are really terrifying. The really terrifying thing is that you're awake and you just don't have control of your body. But it's so interesting. You're telling me about Hatman. There's an Albanian folklore around sleep paralysis that is a man in a golden hat. What's interesting about it is that most versions of sleep paralysis are really terrifying. This particular folklore is about a man in a golden hat who comes to you and gives you the gift of stillness when you're feeling beleaguered or weary. The only mythology I've heard that has a kind of a positive spin, but is also a man in a hat.
I just think strangers in the house, period, not good. But I do like
exactly.
I do like the idea of having a little relaxing time to be still. You spend a fair amount of time in the book talking about pain. I want to shift into that topic. Morphine, you write, once named morphium for the Greek god of dreams, was extracted from opium poppies in 1804 by a 21-year-old German pharmacist who soon became a morphine addict. Heroin came next, synthesized by Bayer Pharmaceuticals in 1898, twice as potent as morphine, far quicker, slipping easily from the blood into the brain. Derivative formulations such as oxycodone and Dilaudid quickly followed, each touted as the magical panacea that would treat pain without fueling addiction. You write, as an intern, I learned about pain piecemeal and at a distance, the type of cancer that breaks bones, the electric jolt of a spinal cord injury like a cattle prod. Equally, I learned that hospitals are haunted by an entirely different sort of pain, an ineffable psychic pain that lingers within hospital walls, waiting to be inhaled like mold spores. This is the pain of chronic illness. It's the pain of a teenager who has spent more days inside a hospital than out, has missed all of her school dances, and spent most of her Halloween hospitalized, with nurses dressed as Disney characters. When I read passages like this, I thought about what you chose to do for a living. I've recently spent some time talking to a former police officer about all that a cop is surrounded by day in and day out, so much of it negative, so much of it unappealing. I found myself thinking about how much pain you're around. And I believe at one point in the book, you acknowledge eventually having to not care as much as you did at the beginning.
It's a really intractable problem. I'm sure this is true for policing, but it's absolutely true for medicine, which is that as you do it more, as you see more death and you see more illness, in some ways you get better at it. You get better at predicting what's going to happen to someone. At the same time, the more you see something, the less remarkable or awful or heartbreaking it becomes. So it's this really terrible double-edged sword where I think sometimes experience makes people better at their jobs, but also really you can only witness so much death or witness so much pain before you start to sort of harden against it or start to view it with sort of a clinical detachment. And I think there's something that's necessary about some of that, but it also makes it, I really felt like when I was a resident, I was transforming and I was becoming a better doctor, but I was also becoming less of a normal human beyond my work. It's interesting. I work now often with residents and with students, so people who are in that process of transforming into doctors. And I really treasure that because I think it's such a helpful reminder to have someone with you who's seeing something for the first time. Anyone who's treated in the hospital, it's the worst day of their life. And I think it's helpful for me as a physician to be around people who remind me of that so that I'm not just kind of moving through the day saying, oh, this is just ordinary.
We're talking about the book, The Mind Electric, a neurologist on the strangeness and wonder of our brains. The neurologist is Priya Anand, my guest. You write, pain is elusive, so personal that it inevitably defies the myriad rating scales doctors have devised to quantify it. One ranging from flickering pain to torturing pain, another from a smiling face to a sobbing face. In her essay on being ill, Virginia Woolf reflects on the ways in which language fails those in pain. Let a sufferer try to describe pain in his head to a doctor, and language runs dry. There's nothing ready-made. One is forced to coin words, taking pain in one hand and a lump of pure sound in the other, crushing them together, making up a brand new word. This is the paradox of pain, you write. The scales fail to fully capture it. No one can fully ever know another's pain. We only can believe it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what medicine does best is those illnesses for which we have clear binary objective tests. So a heart attack that shows up exactly in a particular way on someone's electrocardiogram. Medicine is great at that kind of stuff. Medicine is not great at this kind of subjective phenomenology. So exactly as you said, pain is something that is so personal and so intimate, and something that there's no objective test that's going to tell me this person is truly in pain or not. And even the idea of like pain being real or pain being true, pain is complicated. It's not like, for instance, if I were to hold a pen in my hand, I can tell you kind of what the pen feels like. And that is just being carried by the nerve fibers in my fingertips. Pain is bound up with fear. It's bound up with emotion. It's something that's more than just the simple sensation. The reason that pain matters is because of how it makes us feel. And that's hard to quantify.
Yeah, there's one sentence you write here. In the world of the hospital, pain rules supreme, and patients and doctors alike are held hostage to its whims and its rhythms.
I can remember being an intern and at some point getting really frustrated by, people I was caring for who were experiencing pain, who wanted, more medications. And because it is so subjective, it's not some visible gaping wound that a doctor can obviously see. So it's this invisible force that really kind of dictates how hospitals run, how people move through the world, why illness matters.
I had an experience in my mid-30s where I began to develop chronic pain that no doctor could identify in terms of its source. I went from MD to MD to MD. I found the pain growing, intensifying. At times I would find it moving, not staying in one place. I lost weight. I started to lose energy, started to lose my hunger. Doctor after doctor after doctor I went to for a year and a half, could not find anything, and I began exploring the alternative medicine world. What was fascinating to me about that whole journey was that not one doctor ever said, you might want to talk to a psychiatrist. Not one. And I was at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, several days. No one brought it up. If they'd have given me those 25 questions you can rattle off, that if you hit enough of them, you are depressed, they would have found that that is what I was dealing with and would have sent me there. When I eventually, through a dream I had, decided to go talk to a psychiatrist, he said, Mishke, your case isn't even that interesting. I see this stuff all the time. I remember actually talking to one MD saying, is it possible this thing is depression? And he's, no, I know it's not. He said, one thing you got to understand about chronic pain is 90% of people who have chronic pain will get depressed. So it's not surprising you're depressed from the chronic pain, which made sense to me as well. But the way out of this chronic pain was through my brain. And I took time off work. I dealt with the depression. The pain went away. Took me several years to figure out the game of keeping it at bay, which I eventually figured out. But that year and a half made me think, boy, if there's a way I could prevent anyone else from ever having to go through this. I always wanted to go back to the Mayo Clinic and say, you guys are diagnostic masters. You are the kings of diagnosing. Don't miss this again, the next guy that comes to you like me.
I think in medicine, we love to try and separate our mind from our body, but unfortunately, it's not that simple. It's all made of the same stuff.
Right.
There's no reason to believe that things like depression wouldn't manifest with symptoms that are in your physical body. I'm so glad that you were able to sort of figure out how to keep things at bay. It sounds like
you often hear this. You must encounter this a lot. Getting an answer is as powerful sometimes as a cure.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I think that's medical students, neurology is not super popular because there's this idea that neurology is about giving someone a diagnosis and not having a solution for it. Compared to cardiology, we're still very much in our infancy as neurologists and what we can offer to people. That's changing. There are more treatments. But I have always felt like there's something that's so powerful about giving a name to what someone's experiencing it. Because what you're doing is you're saying what you're experiencing is real.
Right.
And it's almost like a prophecy. Like if I can give you a name for what you're experiencing, it'll tell you something about what to expect. Certain things you're worried about, you no longer will have to worry about. So I think it's incredibly powerful. And I love that you speak to that because I think doctors actually, even doctors and medical students, I think don't actually realize how much power there is in that compared with the simpler stuff of giving someone a drug for their symptoms.
I found this sentence in your book very powerful. By this point in my practice, I was well acquainted with uncertainty. I dwelled in uncertainty as if it were a condemned house. This is a very powerful way of helping a reader get in the head of a doctor who is dealing repeatedly with the unknown and the maybe and the multiple possibilities, dwelling in uncertainty as if it were a condemned house.
I think that's a reality that people who have experienced illness or people whose loved ones have experienced illness, I think are very well acquainted with, but one that I think we often as doctors have a hard time sort of admitting to ourselves how much uncertainty there is. In neurology, one of the biggest challenges is prognosis. So someone experiences something that causes an injury to their brain and their family wants to know, are they going to wake up? Are they going to have a meaningful life? And the answer is that there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. I could tell you what the actuarial tables or the numbers look like, but when you're thinking about an individual, I think you really are just dwelling in uncertainty. And it's something I still don't relish. And I think it's one of the hardest lessons to learn in medical training.
One of the things that you deal with in your practice is people hearing voices. The title of your book, The Mind Electric, a neurologist on the strangeness and wonder of our brains. My God, the strangeness. Hearing voices is remarkably common. In one study from the 80s, researchers surveyed 375 healthy college students and found that nearly 3/4 had heard a voice that no one else could hear. Most heard their own name in a store, alone in their house, at night as they fell asleep. Nearly 40% reported hearing a voice relaying their thoughts. Some heard the voice of God. Others heard the voice of a dead relative. In another study surveying people with schizophrenia across multiple cultures, researchers found that American patients heard violent, disturbing, anonymous voices that they attributed to their disease. These voices were assaultive, intruding into the intimate depths of their minds. In India, more than half the participants heard the voices of family members, of parents and spouses and in-laws. The cultural effect on how people experience the different things that happen in their brain, that's fascinating to me.
It's so fascinating because I think the biology is really reliable, right? Like humans are all made the same way. We have the same biological idiosyncrasies, but how we make meaning of those experiences is shaped by so many different things. What neurology has taught me is that we are meaning-making machines. Like we are designed to find stories and narratives and make meaning out of things in the world. And we impose that on our own bodies. We impose that on everything we encounter in the world. And I think the voice hearing is so fascinating because it is biologically constant. So people are experiencing the same biology, but for someone, it might be what they're actually hearing is completely different, how they experience it, whether it's bad or good. All of that is a consequence of so many more complex factors than just the straight biology.
I love what was found in Ghana, where the idea of disembodied spirits speaking to the living is part of the culture. The majority of participants didn't identify the voices they heard as pathological or diseased. They described it as hearing the voice of God, helping to guide their decisions. They just tell me to do the right thing, one man said. If I didn't have these voices, I would have been dead long ago. In some cultures, the mind is a private space, while in others it is open to outside influences, loved ones, elders, and the divine in important ways that shape how inner voices are received or heard. If I had the choice, if I felt I had the choice to send the meaning in one direction or the other, to send the narrative in one direction or the other, my Lord, I would certainly want to go in the direction of helpful voices.
Illness and wellness are not super clear binary. Medicine and culture are imposing these categories, but it's not like things are cleanly either pathological or normal. I think there's so much variation to kind of the human experience. And there's also sort of a movement that has the idea that when people experience voices, the way to respond is actually to communicate back. So to negotiate with those voices or to develop a relationship with them rather than letting them stay kind of disembodied and scary.
That really makes sense to me. Are you familiar at all with a phenomenon, I believe it's called third man syndrome?
No, I don't think so.
I need to take a quick break here, but a man named John Geiger wrote an entire book called The Third Man Factor. I interviewed him for a couple of hours, and I want to just pass along this experience that people all around the world have had. And we'll do that after this quick break. Stick around, everyone. Priya Anand and her book, The Mind Electric, after this. Whenever I talk about the Wellshire Memory Care Facility in both Bloomington and Medina, I think to myself, what would stop someone from bringing their loved one to the Wellshire? Bringing a parent, a grandparent, or spouse to this brilliant memory care facility. And I determined that location would be the reason you wouldn't go there. Maybe it's not convenient to where family members live who want to visit this loved one. Don't ever let that be the deciding factor. Let the deciding factor be what day-to-day life is going to be like for the person you love, the person who needs memory care, how the hours will pass for them. Will they be fruitful, meaningful, pleasurable hours, or will they be long, lonely, hard hours? What would you want for yourself? Ask yourself that question, and the Wellshire is going to be the answer every single time. The Wellshire Memory Care Facilities in Bloomington and Medina. When the investment advisor Josh Arnold talks to you about your savings, your financial goals, your retirement plans, your money, you may worry that this chit-chat is costing you a lot of money. His time is money, you're saying to yourself. You're saying, I'm sitting here thinking about the cost to me with every minute we talk. Stop! Call Josh Arnold now and talk to him for 48 minutes for nothing. 48 minutes for free. Why 48 minutes? He wanted to throw out a number people would remember, because it's such a strange number. 48 minutes free on the phone. Just call him and talk and then hang up. You are out nothing. But what you could learn about your financial future may change your life, certainly financially. 952-925-5608. Rewind this, write the number down. Give him a call, tell him where you heard about him.
Investment services offered by Josh Arnold Investment Consultant, LLC, a security and investment advisor. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All investments involve risk. Tommy MISCHKE is a paid endorser.
If you, and you're a busy doctor, so I don't expect you to do this, but if you Google two things from this interview, you might feel that it was worth it. The Hat Man.
I definitely will be.
Research Hat Man. And number two, the third man syndrome. People in life and death situations, alone, desperate, will experience the presence of something that seems completely real and seems to be a person, a real person, they don't feel the need to turn around and look to see if it's there. They feel very sure it's there, and they can hear it, and it's advising them and guiding them and helping them figure out the next thing they have to do in order to survive. Those voices are always correct. They're always helpful. Even people like Charles Lindbergh on his flight credit this voice when it was all going to go to hell, when he didn't think he could make it across the Atlantic. This voice, this person that was just over his shoulder, guided him. There's a reason it's called Third Man and not Second Man, and I can't remember what it is. But report after report after report, famous people, people from all over the world in life and death survival situations, report this. And here, it is a lovely voice. It is a helpful voice. It is a caring voice. Anyway, it's been something I've enjoyed reading about, and that I always find hopeful that when it looks like it's over and there's no way out, suddenly either some other part of you is delivering this as some sort of detached voice, or who knows what else. It may be how people came up with angel stories. I don't know. But I love these stories because they're all so different in that the advice and guidance given is specific to the situation.
I love that what you might need at a particular moment is different. There's something that's constant, which is that everyone's having this experience, but it's so particular to what you need at that particular moment.
The other question is this simply an individual's own brain? Take, for example, Jim Savigny, who was swept down a mountain in the Rockies in an avalanche. His friend was killed. Jim broke his back in 2 places, broke his arms. He was a complete wreck. He lay down next to his climbing friend and just prepared to die, and then suddenly had the sense that there was a presence there. A third man appeared and urged him to get up, and actually gave, as you say, very specific survival tips. He said he was in absolutely no condition to contrive an exit strategy for himself. He was basically near death himself. So this advice was very much in the sense of another being there. He felt a woman, a great empathetic power, really, but female. Is it possible, though, that advice was really just something that his own brain had created and then externalized? I mean, that's the discussion, isn't it? I spoke to people who are people of profound, deep faith, for whom the experience was undoubtedly a religious experience. However, interestingly, if you talk to people who are a-religious, people who don't necessarily believe or certainly don't practice their beliefs, I'm thinking of Reinhold Messner. Reinhold Messner had this experience on several mountains, Nagna Parbat and also on Everest. And while he felt he was helped, he felt he was guided, he felt the companionship, and he enjoyed it and benefited from it, he never felt that it was anything other than some internal power that he had been able to call upon. So for him, that was sufficient.
Okay.
The fact that it was an internal power, a human capacity, little understood, but nonetheless a human capacity, didn't make it a worse, smaller, or less significant experience for him. So I think a lot depends on the individual. I'm not taking a position as to whether there is a religious. I mean, clearly, when you look at this, it has all the hallmarks of a religious experience, as described for centuries. But it has the same effect on people whether they are believers or not. And there are certainly some both psychological and neurological bases for this experience. It's not, it can be explained, I think, through scientific mechanisms. I still think it's a wonderful, powerful idea that we are essentially hardwired for human companionship, that we have the capacity when alone, when adrift, when lost, when at the very end of life's tether, we have this capacity to reach out and to actually find a companion. I mean, even if it is an individual neurological response or psychological response to an extreme experience, I still think that's quite beautiful and profound when you think about it. But I don't think you can ever dismiss belief and faith. Perhaps if there is an angel switch in our brains to help us lend a hand when we need it most, perhaps God put it there. Perhaps it's there for a reason. Perhaps it's part of a grand design.
one other part of your book that I found as interesting, if not the most interesting, when you talked about your residency. Can you help someone, first of all, understand the process of becoming a doctor? What are the steps?
In the United States, most people go to college and then they go to medical school. And medical school, the first years in medical school are a lot like college. They're classes in biochemistry and different kinds of physiology. The second 2 years of medical school, you rotate through all of the different services in the hospital. So you learn how to be a pediatrician, you learn how to be a surgeon, and you're really sort of there observing different kinds of medicine in action. And then you go through something called a match, which is where you decide what kind of doctor you want to be. You apply, and some nameless, faceless algorithm assigns you to a program somewhere in the country, and you fly to that place and you start your residency. And that's your first job as a doctor. So you are getting paid, usually not well, and you are typically working. So the laws now are that the work week for residents is supposed to be capped at 80 hours. And in many programs, you're working not far off of that 80 hours. When I was a resident, we also would, every fourth day, we would work a 30-hour shift. So it's this kind of apprenticeship program where you're learning how to be a doctor, you're practicing as a doctor, you're often by yourself in the hospital overnight, working these really grueling hours. It's this program that's intended to kind of transform people into doctors just by kind of sheer repetition and volume and exposure. I did my residency program at Johns Hopkins, which had the origins of residency date back to Johns Hopkins in kind of the 19th century. And there were two main people who inspired the start of residency programs. So one was William Osler, he was an internist, and he was the first one to call his trainees residents because he required that they actually reside at the hospital. They had an 8-year course of training. They had to live at the hospital for the entire 8 years. They were not allowed to marry for the entire 8 years because they were to be entirely devoted to their work. So they would live at the hospital so they could respond when a patient needed them at the drop of a hat, and they couldn't have anything else in their life but medicine while they were learning this craft. And the other man who helped to inspire residencies was also named William Halstead. He was a surgeon. He was one of the first cancer surgeons, and he did all kinds of amazing and innovative things. He was really kind of this daring surgeon and very inspired in many ways. He was very exacting, and he famously did not sleep. He operated for days and days and days without sleeping, and he expected the same of his trainees. And we learned long after he died, we learned that he actually had been a cocaine addict. And that had fueled all of his amazing achievements. It had fueled all of his sleepless weeks. But the system that he kind of outlined, we have clung to. The expectation that doctors shouldn't need sleep as they go through their training, we've really clung to. So it's a fascinating origin story that rattles your faith in the foundations of modern medicine, but still a system where doctors kind of go through this very grueling experience. And the goal is to help people transform into competent doctors.
There's so much here. There is a quality here of kind of a medical version of boot camp. We're going to separate the people who are really meant to do this from those who are just looking for a decent income. Watch, we're really going to find out who really wants to be a doctor now. Yeah, and there's this absurdity to it. You said at some point you would be working 30 straight hours. I want to believe that that's good for patients, that their doctors put up 30 hours, but I have a hard time believing it is. I want to believe this is good for everybody. 80-hour week minimum. Are you that good at your job when you are being pushed that hard all the time?
The answer is no. The answer is that not sleeping makes people way worse at their job, no matter what their job is, but especially medicine. I think you touched on the original residencies were to weed people out. It's also an initiation ritual, like you described boot camp. I think so many groups have initiation rituals, and medicine is no different. But it's so interesting. I still struggle with this because I think about my training, and some part of me still says, oh, but like I'm a better doctor because I worked those 30-hour shifts, or, you want to feel like there's some meaning in what you've been through. And I think doctors who are on the other side of it maybe cling to this ritual because we want to believe that what we did was meaningful and that it made us better in some way. I still haven't sort of seen a great answer for how we should be going about this, but we do know that not sleeping makes you worse at your job and makes you, unfortunately, one of the big things that not sleeping does is actually make you cockier. You underestimate your deficits when you are deprived of sleep. And I think that's the most dangerous thing for a doctor.
I just want to read this little couple of paragraphs from your book. In some ways, my residency training was lawless. Terrified young doctors left alone in the hospital overnight. In others, it was bound by a series of unspoken rules, both harsh and essential for survival. Never complain, never ask for help, never cry. Feel the shame of every mistake, then bury it so deeply that you can barely acknowledge it to yourself. I can still recall the details of every misstep, even as the rest of residency seems to have composted it into the mix of anxiety and gut instinct that still somehow guides my medical practice. The idea that there was this guy, this madman, this Halstead, who I enjoyed reading about. During one 6-year stretch in New York, Halstead simultaneously held appointments at 6 different hospitals, holding clinics 7 days each week at one and operating every night at another. In between, he held storied teaching sessions for a select group of medical students, taking them on bedside rounds and demonstrating surgical techniques alongside lectures and pathology sessions. Examining his schedule during those years, it is difficult to imagine that Halstead slept at all. To learn that he was the model, that he was the guy everybody looked at and said, well, if he can do it, we got to do it. And that's the way you do it. And you got to drive yourself and push yourself. And you find out the guy was a cocaine addict. And that's what it's all modeled on. Madness. But I do love the idea that someone working on me has been put through some crucible. I do love the idea that they've been tested. I do love the idea that they're the strong and the weak have been weeded out. I just don't know if this was the way.
Crucible, I think, is a great word. It has to feel like a transformation. And there's something like mysterious, I think, that happens during residency that you can't even fully articulate. I watch it now because I work often with residents, and over the 4 years of their training, they are different as neurologists. And there's something that just becomes like indelible in your body that somehow really transforms people. But I'm sure there's a better way to do it that doesn't require cocaine. You know, I use the word absurd, and I think that was the perfect way to describe it.
One last little anecdote about Halstead. You write he was unflinching, even reckless. He infamously transfused his sister with his own blood as she hemorrhaged after giving birth. Perhaps the first successful blood transfusion, and he removed his mother's gallbladder on her dining room table, middle of the night, after he found her in pain. I would have loved to have met this guy. He sounds like he would have been fun to hang out with for a little while, just to kind of observe, but I think the cocaine would have been the giveaway, yeah.
People loved him. Like when I was writing this, I dug up his obituary in the Baltimore Sun, and it was like, I mean, surgeons now still really revere him. And I think if you ask many different doctors, many of them would say that the cocaine was just a foible, and like he was still the greatest American surgeon. So I think people view the history differently, but I would have loved to meet him too.
I want to end the interview by moving into this final category, and it is the final category for all of us, death. You write at one point in your book, and just a reminder, the book is The Mind Electric, a neurologist on the strangeness and wonder of our brains, Priya Anand, the author. As I continued residency, death became ordinary. It no longer broke my heart. You talk about a woman who came in and died of a massive hemorrhage. By then, I could do the brain death examination by rote, swinging my pen light at each pupil with a flick of one hand, while the other carefully lifted each eyelid. When I told the woman's family that she was brain dead, her twin sister howled, a guttural noise that seemed to come from some yawning chasm deeper than her throat. Their father knelt beside her, but she pushed him away, saying, "You still have your sister. Your sister is alive, and mine is gone." You write, "Once I would have thought of my own sister and felt the same chasm open in my own chest, but instead I murmured an apology, thinking only of the paperwork of death. To become a doctor, I was becoming less of a human being." We talked about that a little bit earlier, but that balance, it's an impossible request, I think, for doctors, given all you have to deal with. But I was struck by the downside of the profession you chose.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. I think you're exactly right that I think it's an impossible ask to try and sort of find a balance between those two things, experience and empathy. It's like fish in water. I think when you're swimming in it for so long, it can be really hard to realize what it is that's around you. Maybe that's why residency feels like it needs to be a crucible. Maybe that's why people want their doctors to walk through this crucible, is because you have to transform in some way in order to sort of keep your wits about you in situations where something horrible is happening. But every once in a while, when I was a resident, I mentioned I did a pediatric neurology rotation, and most of my residency was taking care of adults, but I can remember how it rattled me in a totally new way to care for children who were ill. And I had to take a step back and say, why am I experiencing this so much more strongly? And then I realized the question was not, why am I experiencing this so strongly? The question was, why do I not experience it so strongly when I'm taking care of an adult who has the same, profound illness or dies? And it was because I had lost something, not because there was something special about the experience of watching children be ill. When you pause to consider it, I think it really rattles you. But I think it's unfortunately like something that all of us in medicine just have to negotiate every day of our lives.
Jenny and Tom Hatters went to EcoFun Motorsports and bought a pair of e-bikes. They rode together 2 different times, and that was that. They immediately sold their bicycles and, quite surprisingly, canceled their couples counseling session with a therapist. They found their rides together down a country road or a city bike path with their astoundingly comfortable and easy-to-ride e-bikes simultaneously made their regular bikes seem obsolete and made being together as a couple so darn much fun. They glided and let the bike do the work when they needed to, and they pedaled when they wanted to, and it was never hard. Never did they look at how far they had gone and the fact that they needed to go that same distance back again. Never did they painfully pedal uphill. Never again did they complain. They just laughed and had fun and thanked their lucky stars that they had found EcoFun Motorsports and the big e-bike sale, which is going on right now in Forest Lake and Burnsville. Get there and tell them where you heard about them. EcoFunMotorsports.com. There's a line you wrote in your book that had to do with this idea of death. For reasons that remain inscrutable to science, the last days of life often come with a terrible clarity. The symptoms of neurologic illnesses, dementia, schizophrenia, whatever, lift in someone's final moments. First of all, I wasn't aware of that, although I can think of people telling me stories about their individual relatives having this happen. This profound clarity, the sense of the symptoms fading just before death, the person's back momentarily. There's this very alive, living, clear-thinking creature looking right at you, talking to you, and then they're gone not too long after that. And there's no known reason for that. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's called terminal lucidity. And it's interesting because I think the transformations that happen to a dying brain, it can happen in one of 2 ways. So one is terminal lucidity, which is this moment of clarity at the end of someone's life. But people can also experience what's called terminal delirium, which is someone who has been lucid and clear will lose their grip on reality and start to experience hallucinations, restlessness, other things sort of in the moments before they're dying. There can be a real peace that terminal lucidity can bring to loved ones who are left behind, but it can also feel very cruel. Like, finally, I'm getting to see my loved one, and then I'm just moments before I lose them. There are all kinds of transformations that happen in the dying brain and all kinds of studies that are geared towards understanding these shifts that happen at the very last moments of someone's life. But I haven't heard a satisfactory answer for why it would be that someone would feel suddenly clear in the moments before they die.
What remains for you on the top of the list as the next thing you would really love the science of neurology to understand? What would be the thing, if you could pick one thing right now, the next leap in understanding in neurology? What are you hoping for in the coming years?
Hearing you talk about your sort of experience and your journey with pain as a manifestation of your depression, that really strikes a chord with me. I think there is this entire no man's land of the way that emotions and other kinds of psychological experiences manifest with bodily distress that we have no understanding of. We call them sort of functional symptoms, which are symptoms in your body that we can't pinpoint a physical wound that caused them, that are somehow related to something you're experiencing in your brain or in your mind. And it's so common. It's such a universal experience. And it's something we still can't explain. Like, why do certain kinds of emotions cause physical pain or physical distress? I would love if we could start thinking about that in a coherent way and come up with a way to understand it for ourselves and also for the people who are experiencing it.
That would be wonderful. And I remember thinking after my experience, how many of me are there out there? I certainly found myself thinking about that and wondering about how many people could be helped if we got better answers on this stuff. So I certainly understand that wish.
Absolutely.
The Mind Electric, a neurologist on the strangeness and wonder, and it's both strangeness and wonder of our brains. Priya Anand, thank you so much for spending all this time with me. I know you're busy, you got a lot going on, but it certainly was wonderful on my end.
Tommy, it was such a joy talking with you. Thank you for your curiosity, and you're a real polymath, and it's such a pleasure to talk with you.
I appreciate that. Best of luck going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to all you listeners. Please remember, this is show number 2 this week. 2 more shows will be coming out next week. They appear Wednesdays and Fridays at 6 p.m. sharp. 2 a week from here on out. Some will have interviews like this. Some will have no interviews at all. This one ran long because I really liked the guest. But 50 minutes will probably be closer to the length for these programs. If you want to email me, please do, MISCHKE@hubbardradio.com. If you want to text, 651-321-8949. If you have ideas for shows, let me know about them. If you just want to comment or ask a question, that's fine as well. If you want to tell me a story about visiting with one of my advertisers, I love that. Might even include it in one of my ads. Anyway, until next time, folks, be well and so long.